So when I had first started speaking, I'd said really this was a question, and this actually the acceptance of this whole bill is a question of credibility for the government, action, a measurement of the action that they've taken, and trust going forward. And I had run through quite a long list, 3 pages worth in my notes, of where there had been credibility gaps with the performance of this government in environmental monitoring. So I'd mentioned that we'd had that whole time where the government kept insisting it was the best monitoring program until that was completely disproved and they had to admit it themselves. And then they started to develop another world-class one, part of which is included in this bill. But credibility problems with the RAMP program, with self-monitoring, with the whole concept of voluntary rather than mandatory monitoring, the lack of an accelerated groundwater mapping program, that industry is looking for certainty and they cannot get it, problems with the metrics of how, when and where we measured various things, credibility problems with board appointments, who tended to be overwhelmingly friends of the government and not necessarily people with qualifications, problems with conflict of interest, credibility around cumulative effects. Again, we're still looking for very weak support for alternative energy, and over my time I've heard the most amazing excuses for the lack of support for alternative energy development. The government keeps talking about the concept of balance, but we don't have a balance right now. We actually have a long way to go to achieve balance between industrial development and the environment. For example, we just appointed the Alberta regulator as a person that used to work for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, and just a tad biased there. And doesn't, even if we believed it here in Alberta, it sure isn't getting credibility and any kind of traction outside of the province. So again, problems with action not taken and credibility. Weak action on wildlife protection. I mean, for any kind of a wildlife corridor, these animals will look like they're on drugs trying to follow what's possible to get through. We've had repeatedly reduced funding on things like the water advisory panels. We've had repeated problems with enforcement. And, of course, we've just had our own Auditor General coming out today, repeating his request that that the government is able to show that it's made any progress whatsoever on climate change and meeting its targets, because he has not been able to detect any proof of that, given what the government is doing. So there's a lack of credibility, a lack of action taken. So going forward, do we have trust? Well, can we see a larger plan in place with this agency as a piece of that plan? And I can see where this agency fits into the plan, but I just don't have the government's lost credibility with me, that I can trust them to move ahead in any kind of vigorous way, that I can trust that they're actually going to reduce emissions, that they're going to work on the coal, do something active and vigorous, muscular action with coal-fired electricity plants, that any of these many things that I have already noted are actually going to get done. And when I've been extremely fortunate to be able to travel outside of the province and outside of the country, and boy, when you do, you sure get a clear look back at the lack of credibility that we have, at the where the other populations, particularly in the European Common Market, where their populations are in thinking, how they look at things like development of bike lanes and mass transit and recycling and biomass, and what they will accept from their government and how far they push their government to do things. And they are light years ahead of us. So I can see why we're having trouble getting people outside of Canada to believe that the government is taking any kind of vigorous action, because it's nothing compared to what's going on in other places.